"You should have kept walking." She said it like an apology, the kind you give right before something terrible happens. The three men by the truck didn't know that. They laughed instead, and the broad one with the crowbar took a step toward the dog. Mist rolled low over the smoky mountains that morning, thick enough that the trailhead sign was barely visible from 20 feet. 29-year-old Elena Vasquez liked it that way. Fewer people meant fewer questions, and questions were the one thing Elena had spent the last 6 years of her life avoiding. At her side, moving with the same unhurried rhythm as her boots on gravel, was Atlas, a Dutch shepherd, brindle-coated, built like something assembled rather than bred. Wide chest, low center of gravity, a jaw that looked like it belonged on something twice his size. Most people who passed them on the trail smiled at the dog and didn't look twice. They didn't see the notch missing from his left ear, or the way his eyes tracked motion at the tree line instead of squirrels in it. Atlas had been a multi-purpose canine attached to a Marine Raider detachment out of Camp Lejeune. 4 deployments. 2 confirmed finds that kept convoys from rolling over buried ordnance. He'd taken shrapnel outside Mosul that cost him half an ear and nearly cost him the leg. He was 7 now, technically retired, technically just a very large pet. Elena was technically a wildlife conservation contractor, on paper anyway. She did real survey work for the Forest Service twice a year to keep the cover clean. Unofficially, in a file that didn't exist on any unclassified server, she was a former Marine Raider herself, one of the first women to make it through the assessment pipeline and disappear into a unit that didn't officially accept women, because officially it didn't accept anyone. She'd spent 3 years training close-quarters combat to operators twice her size, and had the quiet, settled confidence of someone who'd never needed to prove it twice. This morning, she just wanted 4 miles of trail and an hour where nobody needed anything from her. She didn't get it. The truck came into view at the second switchback, a jacked-up Ford F-250, parked sideways across the only passable section of trail, blocking it the way you block something on purpose. 3 men were arranged around it like they'd been waiting. Not hikers. Canvas jackets, scuffed boots, the unmistakable posture of men who'd been drinking since before sunrise and didn't care who knew it. The one in front, heavyset with a faded tattoo crawling up from his collar, pushed off the truck's hood when he saw her. Cole Brannigan. Elena didn't know his name yet, but she'd know it within the hour. Along with several things about him, he'd rather she hadn't found out. Flanking him were 2 younger men, one rail-thin and twitchy, gripping a tire iron, like it was a security blanket, the other heavy-set and slow-moving, holding a crowbar with both hands. Atlas went still beside her, not aggressive, not barking, just still, the particular stillness of something that had learned a long time ago that noise gets you killed and silence gets the job done. "Morning," Elena said, voice even. "Mind moving the truck a few feet? Just need to get by." Cole spat into the dirt and looked her up and down, then looked at Atlas, and something in his face shifted into a grin Elena had seen on 100 men in 100 worse places. "Trail's closed today, sweetheart. Private business. This is a state forest. It's public land. It's whatever I say it is." He took 2 steps forward, and the other 2 straightened like dogs catching a scent. "Unless you want to pay a toll to get through. Or," his eyes dropped back to Atlas, lingering in a way that made something cold settle behind Elena's ribs, "maybe we just take the mutt instead. Bet he'd fetch good money up in Knoxville. Dogfighting crowd loves a build like that." The temperature of the conversation changed the moment he said it. Not loud, not dramatic, just final, the way a door closes. "That's not happening," Elena said. "Wasn't asking." The thin one, Davy, though she didn't know that yet either, laughed high and nervous. "She's gonna let the dog loose on us. I got a knife in my boot that says he doesn't get close." Atlas's ears flattened. He looked up at Elena, waiting, every muscle coiled and ready, and for half a second she considered it. Atlas had survived an IED. He hadn't survived it to get gutted by a meth runner with a pocket knife in a Tennessee state forest. "Stay," she said quietly, and Atlas obeyed instantly, trembling with the effort of it, every fiber of him wanting to move. She stepped forward, putting herself between the dog and the men. "Last chance," she said. "Get in the truck and drive away." Cole's grin curdled into something uglier. He wasn't used to women who didn't flinch, and it offended something basic in him. "Grab the dog," he snapped at the heavyset one. "She gets in the way, breaks something." The crowbar came up in a wide, looping swing aimed at her ribs, the kind of swing that telegraphs itself a full second before it lands, except it never landed. Elena stepped inside the arc instead of away from it, trapping his forearm with one hand, while the heel of her other palm drove up under his jaw with the flat, mechanical force of someone who'd done this thousands of times in a training gym and a handful of times for real. He staggered, and she used the momentum to hook his leg out from under him, dropping 230 pounds of him onto the packed dirt with a sound that emptied his lungs. Davy's eyes went wide. He fumbled the knife out of his boot, slashing wildly, more scared than skilled. Elena didn't grab for the blade. Amateur mistake, the kind that gets fingers removed. She redirected his arm wide and put a short, brutal punch into his floating ribs that folded him in half, then finished it with a knee that put him on the ground beside his friend, unconscious before he landed. 11 seconds. 2 men down. Cole stood alone, the color draining out of his face as the math caught up with him. He backed against the truck, hand drifting toward his waistband, and Elena saw the movement before he'd even finished making the decision. "Don't," she said, and her voice had lost every trace of warmth it had. "I will not ask twice." He drew anyway. Pride does that to men. "Atlas, fass!" The command released 6 years of restraint in under a second. Atlas crossed 15 feet of forest floor in a blur of brindle muscle and clamped onto Cole's forearm with a force that sent the revolver spinning out of his hand and over the tailgate. Cole went down screaming, and Atlas held the bite, controlled, unyielding, the low growl in his chest, the only sound in the clearing. Elena walked to where the gun had landed, checked the cylinder and pocketed it. Then she crouched beside the truck bed and noticed the corner of a tarp that had been kicked loose during the struggle. Underneath it, stenciled in faded military green, prophecy of U.S. Army, Ordnance Disposal Unit. Her stomach dropped in a way 3 drunk men with a crowbar never could have managed. She pulled the tarp back further. Crates, a dozen of them, sealed, the kind that came out of a depot inventory, not a hardware store. These weren't local idiots who'd wandered onto a trail looking for trouble. They were a delivery service. "Atlas, out," she said, and the dog released the bite instantly, standing guard over Cole's sobbing, bleeding form. She didn't have time to wait for the sheriff's department to drive 40 minutes up a logging road. She grabbed Cole by his collar and hauled him upright. "Who are you delivering this to?" I don't know him. We just call him the handler, paying us 30 grand to get it to the ridge by 10. His voice cracked on every word. "Please, they'll kill us if they catch us talking. How many? 2 trucks, maybe 7 guys. They got rifles, lady, real ones, not." He stopped, looking at Atlas, looking at her, finally understanding what kind of woman had just taken 3 of them apart in under 30 seconds. "What are you?" She didn't answer. She flex-cuffed all 3 of them and dragged them off the trail into the brush, out of sight, then checked her watch. 9:51. Whoever was coming would be coming soon, and a lone woman standing over 3 unconscious men in the open was not a position she intended to be caught in. Atlas. Here, they found high ground fast, a shelf of granite overlooking the switchback, thick with mountain laurel, a clean line of sight down to the truck. Elena settled into the cover with the revolver in hand, checking the cylinder out of her habit. A toy. Compared to what she used to carry, it would do. At 9:58, 2 black Suburbans climbed the logging road. Engines low and controlled in a way that civilian trucks never sounded. 6 men stepped out in a synchronized fan, scanning the tree line with the kind of discipline that told Elena everything she needed to know before a single word was spoken. Plate carriers, suppressed rifles. This wasn't a cartel crew. This was a contract team, and contract teams meant someone with real money was on the other end of this. The man in front, older, grey at the temples, moving like a former officer who'd traded a pension for cash, surveyed the scuffed dirt, the abandoned crowbar, the dark stain where Davy had bled into the leaves. He raised a fist. The others stopped instantly. "We have a problem," he said into his radio, calm as a man discussing weather. "Spread out. Find our delivery boys. Weapons free if it moves." His name was Marcus Trent, a former army contracting officer, turned broker for people who didn't ask questions about chain of custody on military hardware. He didn't know it yet, but he was standing in the wrong forest with the wrong woman watching him from 40 yards up. Elena looked down at Atlas. "Time to go to work." Trent split 2 men off to sweep the left flank. They moved well, heel-toe, weapons up, sectors covered, but they were noisy in dry leaves and trusting their optics too much. Elena slid off the back of the granite shelf, using the trunks of old hemlocks to break up her silhouette, and got within 10 feet of their path without either of them noticing. She threw a rock into the brush to her left. Both men spun toward the sound. A half-second lapse, the only one she needed. She closed the distance to the trailing man before he could turn back, clamped a hand over his mouth, and drove a strike into the nerve cluster under his arm that dropped him without a sound. She lowered him to the ground instead of letting him fall. The lead man realized his partner had gone quiet and started to turn. He never finished the motion. Atlas dropped from the low branch of a cedar in absolute silence, hit him mid-chest with 70 pounds of controlled force, and had his wrist in a crushing bite before the man's rifle even cleared the ground. 1 strike to the jaw from Elena finished it. 2 more down. No sound carried back to the trucks. 3 minutes later, Trent's radio crackled with nothing but static where his men's check-ins should have been, and his calm finally cracked at the edges. "Form up," he barked. "We've got a hostile in these woods. Tighten up on the trucks." Elena stepped out of the tree line into the open, hands loose at her sides, unarmed by any measure that mattered to a man like Trent. "It's a woman," he said, baffled, scanning behind her for a team that wasn't coming. "Just one?" "Just one," she agreed. "Drop the rifles, get on the ground, and you walk away from this." Trent laughed, short and humorless. "Light her up!" The order never finished. A high engine whine cut through the trees, and a Bearcat tactical vehicle came crashing through the brush at the bottom of the ridge, lights cutting red and blue through the fog, 4 unmarked SUVs fanning out behind it. Federal agents poured up the slope, rifles leveled, voices overlapping in commands that needed no translation. Trent looked at the wall of agents, then back at the woman who'd been standing in his kill zone 30 seconds earlier, and understood, far too late, exactly what she'd been the entire time. Not a target. Bait. He dropped his rifle and went to his knees in the wet leaves. Elena had triggered the call the second she'd seen the stenciled crates. Not the local sheriff, but a federal task force 2 counties over that took weapons trafficking out of military depots very seriously. They'd been 12 minutes out the entire time. A tactical commander climbed the slope toward her, stepping carefully around the unconscious men in the brush, and stopped a few feet away, staring at her like he couldn't quite reconcile what he was seeing with what had clearly happened here. "Ma'am, did you do all this? By yourself?" Elena reached into her jacket and produced a slim leather credential wallet, handing it over without a word. He opened it, read the embossed seal of Marine Special Operations Command, and went quiet in the particular way that men trained to handle anything went quiet when they finally met something they hadn't trained for. She clipped the leash back onto Atlas's collar. "Just taking my dog for a walk, Commander." She turned and walked back into the fog, the dog at her heel, and within 100 yards the mist had folded over both of them like they'd never been there at all.